Morning decisions. How about a creamy mocha frappuccino drink? Or sweet vanilla? Smooth caramel, maybe? Or a white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Find Starbucks Frappuccino drinks wherever you buy your groceries.
We drove down from Northampton in my car and went down into this cellar, and our lives changed.
Hello, and welcome to another new episode of Live Through That. I'm your host, Mike Hipple, and on this podcast, we dig a little deeper into the pivotal moments that shaped the lives of some of my favorite artists from the 80s and 90s. And a reminder that we're closing in on our 100th episode. A special June episode is on its way. Make sure that you're subscribed so that you won't miss it. And if you're enjoying this show, please share it with friends and spread the word. Today's guest is a true original, a musician, poet, and creative force whose work helped shape the sound and spirit of post-punk. As a member of Bauhaus, David J. brought a distinctive voice and artistic vision to a band that would go on to influence generations. Beyond Bauhaus, his career spans Love and Rockets, some solo projects, spoken word, and collaborations that blur the line between music, art, and storytelling. His work is always pushing boundaries while staying unmistakably his own. Today, David tells us about how this whole journey started for him.
The pivotal moment for me was going to the 100 Club in London in 1976 and seeing the Sex Pistols and the Clash. And that just changed everything. So how I discovered the Pistols was I'd heard of them, I'd heard about them, but never heard them. You had to go and see them live because at that point they hadn't made any records. But I was at a pub in London called the Hope and Anchor, where they used to have a lot of gigs. This is pre-punk, the pub rock bands, and I was into that scene. So like bands like Dr. Feelgood. Joe Strummer was in a band called the 101ers that were part of that scene. Kilburn and the High Roads, which was Ian Dury, and I'd seen Kilburn and the High Roads at the Hope and Anchor. I remember seeing a kid who I didn't recognise as John Lydon or Johnny Rotten, but soon after that gig, I saw him on stage with the Pistols, and I thought, oh, that's that kid right down the front, and he was at that gig. But I was at the gig. I think it was the Stranglers. But I think we'd missed the band playing. We got there too late. And I remember Hugh Cornwell hanging out in the bar. There was like an upstairs bar and the band's played in the basement. And he was there at the bar. And there was a flyer on the wall. I actually fished it out because when I got the idea to show you this, I didn't know it was just audio. So for radio, I'll show you this. You have to use your imagination, but you can see it. That's the actual flyer that I saw on the wall, pinned to a column in the pub, and it's Anarchy in the UK. It says punk special 100 Club, which is at 100 Oxford Street, Monday, September the 20th. Sex Pistols, Clash, Subway Sect, Susie and the Banshees, and from France, Stinky Toys. The Susie and the Banshees, they played the next night. They didn't actually play this night. They switched that around. But the Sex Pistols played and the Clash. And we didn't know the Clash at all because it was like their third gig. And they were on this poster. I noticed it's not the Clash, it's just Clash. They added the later. But so I went there with my brother, Kevin, who was like 17. We drove down from Northampton in my car and went down into this cellar. And our lives changed. And the band that came on before the Pistols was the Clash. And that was just like an explosion of a riot of noise and colour and energy. And Joe Strummer was electrifying. And Mick Jones, we recognised as this kid who we'd seen at the pub rock gig in the pubs because we noticed how stylish he was. So we kind of had an admiration for this guy just based on what he was wearing. But we noticed he cut his hair short because he had when we'd seen him before, he had like a Keith Richards circa 1973 haircut, but then he chopped it, and it was all spiky and drain pipe trousers and the ripped up jackets with the safety pins and all that. That was happening, and then they were, as I say, I can't really put into words how exciting that band were. At one point, the Mick Jones amp cut out, so Joe Strummer had the wherewithal to get a little transistor radio, pulled up the antenna, and tuned in just randomly, and put it up to the mic. And what came through was that it was a news report about a suspected IRA bombing, which was it was like the sound of it was a zeitgeist. This is now, and the guy who was mixing them put on you talk about dub. He put on like a dub echo on this radio voice, and then the drummer Terry Chimes, he started playing like a reggae beat, if I recall correctly. And then Mick Jones got his amp on again, and he was stabbing some chords. It was just amazing. And then the Pistols came on, very very loud. They started the set with Anarchy in the UK, first time we ever heard that, and that was it. It was all over, except it had all begun.
So after seeing the Clash Sex Pistols show, that's when you decided to form a band?
Well, we'd been in bands before, and I've been in bands with Kevin, but we had a different impetus now, because in the bands that we were in before, they're really like covers bands. Although I did start writing some songs, but really it hinted at a direction, because we were like everybody in that scene. We had enough of what rock had become. It had become very overblown, pretentious, pompous, and what those bands were singing about was not relevant to our lives. And then all of a sudden, you've got these kids up there, exactly the same age as us. They're just playing three chords on cheap instruments, but they're playing it with passion and commitment and high energy, a bit of humor. And they're singing about our lives. They're singing about being on the dole, singing about, like the state of England at that time, which was pretty depressing and depressed and yearning for something better, but being realistic about it as well, and saying it probably is not going to get better, but at least we're having this moment, and we're being real, and this is our truth, So it's suddenly music was recontextualized. And I remember turning to Kevin at that gig when the Pistols were playing, say, "Fuck, we got to do this. This is where we got to go." And we did. We decided to form our band, punk band, there and then. And within 3 weeks, we played our first gig. And that was a story all through the UK. Whenever the Pistols played, you hear this same story, that kids were there and they saw it and they got inspired, and then they formed bands.
I had heard that discovering Jamaican dub as a teen was actually a pivotal moment for you as well, musically wise. How does that relate to the Sex Pistols show?
There is a connection there. I mean, before dub existed, I discovered reggae, just reggae, and I discovered that by sneaking into a skinhead discotheque when I was 13, and that's all they would play, exclusively reggae, and just hearing that music played really loud in the dark, in the company of a rather edgy milieu, the skinheads, was very intoxicating and exciting. And I love that music. I fell in love with the music. I mean, I heard reggae on the radio. It's very popular there. This is like early 70s in England. So I'd heard reggae. There was still more commercial reggae on the radio, which I also loved. And they would play that kind of stuff there at this club, but they also played much deeper cuts, and they would have records that would be shipped over from Jamaica that you could only hear in a place like that because they weren't played on the radio. And so certainly that music became very, very much like part and parcel of the fabric of my seminal musical influences. And then a bit later, 76, when punk came along, because all the bands that were into that, they were my contemporaries. They were my generation. You know, I was 19 in 1976, and they were the same age. Some of them a bit younger, some of them a bit older, but around about that age. So they've been brought up in England, and see, reggae was very big because of all the West Indian immigrants that come over in the 1950s, and then had their kids, and they carried the music on, and yeah, it was very much part of English music culture. So all those bands that were in the punk bands were immersed in reggae and loved reggae. I know, like John Lydon was a huge reggae fan and very knowledgeable about music, Jamaican music, and also the Clash, big time. Joe Strummer, very much into reggae, and all of them, Paul Simon and Mick Jones. And in fact, a bit later than I mean, it's the same year or the year after the Roxy became the club to go to. The DJ there was Don Letts, who was of West Indian descent, and he would play. All he would play was reggae, and the very few punk singles that existed, because there weren't that many records. And he always said, Don, he said he didn't have that many punk records, so what he did have was reggae, and all those kids were into reggae, so that's what they played, reggae, dub, you know.
It wasn't long before he started his first band, the Submerged Tenth.
The Submerged Tenth means the lowest of the low. Then we changed it to the Submerged. We only played 3 gigs before they literally pulled the plugs on us, and we couldn't get a gig again after that. Well, we had a very anarchic singer in Yanis Zakis, who was he was half Latvian, half Scottish, and he was a nutcase. He's actually very intelligent, but he was a madman. So his antics were wild. I mean, we went the first gig we played in the back room of this pub called the Racehorse, and punk wasn't really known in our town, Northampton. It wasn't like London. They hadn't sort of cottoned on yet. And that back room was a real mixed clientele, and there was some we would call them smoothies, smooth guys who were probably into like soul music, in their suits with their girlfriends, and there's one guy, was just completely ignoring us. And so Yanis went over to his table, and he had a full pint of beer, picks up the beer and empties half of it over this guy's head, and he gets up to hit him, and then Yanis gives him a mad grin and empties the other half over his own head and shakes what was left of his hair, because he'd burnt off his hair with a cigarette lighter. But and it's just stuff like that. And he had shaving cream, and he'd cover himself with shaving cream, and then packets of cornflakes, and he'd just crunch all the cornflakes into this mess, roll around on the stage, cut himself up, and it was just mad. It was madness, but it was great. But it was like the landlord took exception, understandably, and word got around town.
And after that fell apart, how did Bauhaus come into being?
Well, Yanis left. The singer went off. He went off around Europe, just sort of tramping around Europe. He bought himself an accordion, of all things, and went off being a gypsy. So we sort of reconfigured the band, and actually, I asked Daniel Ash to join the band, and he was into it. And then the other guitarist was my best friend at school, Dave Exton, we called X, and my brother. And we got together, and it sort of mutated. The music mutated a bit, and it became more kind of like new wave. But it kind of all petered out. It didn't go anywhere. And then I got offered a gig in Germany, playing on American air bases, and the money was pretty good. And I committed to doing this. It was all soul and funk music. So I'd learned like 60 of these soul funk tracks. And it was just a couple of days before I was about to go, and Daniel asked me to join his new band. I had seen them. He started this new band with his old friend from school, Peter Murphy. and Kevin was a drummer, and they got in this bass player. And I know that Daniel didn't want me in the band because we'd been in other bands. I mean, prior to, as I mentioned, prior to the punk band, Daniel and I met Daniel at art school. Although I first met Daniel when I was at kindergarten. That's another story. But then we lost track of each other, and then were reunited at art school. But we've always been in touch, and we sort of played around with various combinations, but we never really had a success. But in those bands, I kind of called the shots, I suppose. And he wanted this new band to be his own thing, and I totally respected that and understood it. So he didn't ask me to join until much later. But he had asked me to come down and give my opinion about the singer. And so I went down there and I saw them, they were rehearsing in this mobile classroom. It was in the Teachers Training College in Northampton. And I saw that they had about 5 songs. And I just thought Peter was incredibly charismatic and he had a great voice. And I said, to Daniel, he said, what do you think? I said, he's solid gold. And I really wanted to join that band. But I thought, now, well, they're not going to ask me. And I understand why. So I'll go and do this thing in Germany. But then Daniel did ask me. He said, we fired the bass player. We want you to join. So I didn't have to think too long about that. And I felt bad about it because I committed, but I contacted the band leader, Dave Henderson, and I explained, and he was totally cool about it. He said, "No, we got this other guy. He gigs with us all the time. Go and do that. Don't blame you." So that was good. So so the Pistols thing that was 76, and this start of Bauhaus was late 78. So 2 years.
How did Bela Lugosi's Dead come about?
Yeah, well, the catalyst really was a phone conversation I had with Daniel because we've been watching these classic horror films that was shown a season on TV, and the one that had just been on was Dracula with Bela Lugosi. So I was just on the phone with him. We were planning on our next rehearsal practice session, and then we got chatting about this film. So that was in my head, and then I wrote the lyrics like the next day, and then the day after that we had the rehearsal and I gave the lyrics to Peter. And then we all, as we would in those days, we just all pick up instruments and just start playing, jamming it through, we would call it. And something would emerge out of that. And that's what happened with Bella, and that music emerged magically. And then Peter, pretty much as you hear it on the record, he started to sing those lyrics.
At the time, did you think that you were starting a movement or something along those lines as you were creating the song?
Not a movement, but a very original, magical work of art, really. But we surprised ourselves when that happened, that moment, the creation of that song. We knew we had something really special. And so we decided, we had to record it as quick as possible while it's still hot, which is what we did. We recorded it a few days later. And it was in one take, vocals and all.
After Bauhaus broke up in 1983, you and your brother Kevin Haskins joined with Daniel Ash to form the band Love and Rockets. I assume you still enjoyed working with Daniel?
Yeah, and obviously he did as well. And we'd learned that we had a really good chemistry. We worked together really well. And a big part of that, actually, was being brutally honest with each other and not taking offense. And just that's a big part of working with somebody else. Now, with Peter, that was not the case. Well, he would take offense if you criticized his ideas. You get like, and that just doesn't work. We're trying to just we're trying to make this thing as good as it can be. And for that, you need to be brutally honest with each other. And Daniel and I have always had that.
Is that because you and Daniel have been working together for so long?
No, it's because we're of a certain kind of disposition, and we can put the ego aside. We both got egos, but we can put that aside because we know that the most important thing is making the work as good as it can be, and we also have mutual respect we respect each other's opinions, so we listen,
You said earlier that you knew that you had created something special when you were working on Bela Lugosi's Dead. Have you had that feeling with any other songs that you've written?
Yeah, many times. Yeah.
Can you give me an example of one?
Okay. Again, this was like recorded on the fly. It was. I was on tour. I was on a like solo tour, but I'm touring with a little group, and we stayed overnight with a friend who lived in the woods in the northern California. Anyway, we were just kind of holed up in this place, and she just got this sampler machine, and I was intrigued by this bit of gear, and I asked her if I could have a go on it. So I just randomly I picked a CD from her CD collection and put this first track on to you just to play around with, a sound. It was God, I've said this now and I can't remember the damn track. Maybe I don't want to say because I never credited it. And it ended up on a record. I'm not going to say. Anyway, I put this in and I just started. I didn't really know what the hell I was doing, and I was just playing around, pushing buttons, and something magic happened, and it looped this sound at the start of this record, and it just had magic. I knew it had magic. And she had an old organ, an electric organ that was there. That was the only instrument we had in that place. And my cellist, Joyce Rooks, she started playing this riff on the organ, just sort of jamming along with this riff. And I said, "Oh, that's magic, Joyce. Keep that going." Then I started writing lyrics there and then, and I wanted to record this like as soon as possible. And also the guitar player was there, and he had a guitar, and he was playing along with it, and it was just all coming together. And we had a gig in LA a few days later with a day off, so I booked the studio in North Hollywood, and we went in and we did this track. Although it was kind of half formed, and I love that as well because it's just so you're feeling it and you're just sort of pulling it all together, and within that there's the potential for real magic to happen. And real magic did happen. It's called "Sorrow Sleeps at Night," song for Lana Lilla, and it was like a really obscure track, and it's just been actually it was only on it was like an extra track on a CD, but it's just been reissued on vinyl on Cleopatra Records on an album called "Embrace Your Dysfunction." You can find it on that, and it was sparked off by this crazy story that our hostess told us when she said, so we're in this place and it was, as I say, in the middle of the woods, and it's near a Bohemian Grove. You know that place? Heard of that place? It's a very mysterious and kind of creepy area. And she had these motion lights on her place, and every now and again something would trigger them so that all these trees would light up. It was very dramatic because the walls were like it was wood, but there were a lot of big windows, like full length, like 7 foot windows looked out on this. So you can imagine how dramatic that would be. And there was a reason why she had the motion lights, because she told us that her ex was a psycho, and that she was convinced that he'd murdered this young girl and buried the body out in these woods. So then she left us for the night and went to stay at a friend's house. Thank you very much. And this was just all in my head. So I started writing this like kind of murder ballad about Lana Lilla. And Lana Lilla was the little girl. They found her bicycle. She was like 6 years old. And that haunted me. And just the idea of her under the ground, scratching to get up. And these motion lights, I had this line, these motion lights will catch you. You can only limbo so low. And I just sort of spun this story around this idea. Anyway, it worked out. That was one of those moments.
Motion lights will catch you. lights will catch you. The motion lights will catch you. There's no getting away.
I actually sent that track to Tom Waits. I didn't know, I'd never met Tom Waits, but I had his, I had an address, P.O. box. So I put it on a CD, and because it was sort of in that area of Tom Waits. I love Tom Waits. It had a Tom Waits kind of vibe. And that's right, at one of the gig that we played in this area, that's how I had his address. His personal assistant came to the gig, and she loved it. And she gave me that address. So I just had it with me. I thought, well, this Tom Waits might like this. So I sent it to him. And then I went off on another tour. And when I got back, I had a message on my answering machine from his office saying that he and his wife, Kathleen, really loved the track. And they just wanted me to know. And they invited me up to their place. It's near Santa Rosa. Anyway, so that came from that. So that was a beautiful affirmation, that it was magic.
You have a new record coming out on May 22nd, Tracks from the Attic Revisited, where you've reinterpreted with a full band 10 tracks that were originally recorded at home and released as Tracks from the Attic back in 2024. What made you decide to take those songs and rework them now?
It really came from the label, although when I rediscovered those songs, because I didn't play them, in some cases I had not played those songs, listened to them since the day I recorded them. So means some of them like early, like 84, early 90s, they're very old, and I didn't pursue them as ideas because I got distracted with other ideas, other songs. So they were kind of abandoned. But when I did go back to them, when we were compiling the 3 record set, I started to think of I got ideas for, I could have had, like, if I'd pursued this, I could have added this instrument, I could have changed that a bit. And so it's kind of in my head. And then it was suggested to me by Independent Project Records that I maybe think about going in and doing an album, choose like cherry pick songs and make a single album where those songs are fully realized. And I really enjoyed that process. It's like giving them wings and then seeing them fly,
Thanks so much to David for taking the time to talk with us. He'll have 2 other additional records coming out this year besides Tales from the Attic Revisited, including a concept album on the artist Egon Schiele. So be on the lookout for that. And I'll end with another quick reminder that you can buy my book on 80s musicians and where they are today, 80s Redux, and its sequel, Live Through That, on 90s Artist, wherever you buy your books. And if you like this show, please leave a review where you're listening. It always helps others find us. And of course, subscribe so that you won't miss an episode. And remember, that 100th episode is coming right up. Thanks for listening.
"300 Favorite Albums" with James Campion.
I don't think there's an album I know better front to back. I learned how to play guitar to a lot of these songs.
If I could pick one record to hand someone and say, this is what it feels like to be a woman, it would be this record.
The engineer that was recording the album for us was a novice engineer. He was really the janitor.
The first half of these sessions for the album were totally improvisatory in the sense that they went into the studio and just dealt with whatever happened.
There was space that was left for these listeners to kind of discover it for themselves. That they would say, yeah, my parents listened to it, but I had to build my own relationship to it.
Happiness, good living, peace, love, rock and roll. I just feel like this album is such a wonderful translation of that concept.
People understood they were in a world historical moment, and it felt like it was going to last forever. In fact, the infinite spaces that they explored in The Giant Now is part of what made that explosion so huge.